Now, fears of an economic slowdown have risen sharply since Trump unveiled widespread tariffs last week, sparking a sell-off in the stock market. Trump has now paused some of those import levies for 90 days. But that move has not been enough to restore confidence in the economy. BlackRock CEO Larry Fink has told CNBC that he thinks that they are very close, if not already, in a recession now. He added that the U.S. economy has weakened to a point of growth possibly turning negative. In fact, Fink said that the 90-day pause means longer, more elevated uncertainty. This brief optimism following the pause, it's evaporated. On Thursday, markets rallied. By Friday, the rally had crumbled as China announced retaliatory tariffs on American goods of up to 125%. The U.S. dollar plunged, losing its footing as a global safe haven. It fell to a decade low against the Swiss franc and a 3-year low versus the euro. At the same time, borrowing costs surged, sending shockwaves through bond markets, already jittery over a potential economic contraction. But despite his tariff policy triggering worries, Trump has struck a confident tone. He says they are doing very well and that the policy is very exciting for America and that the world is already moving along quickly. The White House says Trump is optimistic about striking a trade deal with China, even as the two largest economies in the world continue to clash.
But the president has made it very clear he's open to a deal with China.
Why is he optimistic that China's going to make a deal or wants to make a deal if they're not talking? Where's that optimism come from?
He's optimistic.
Okay.
White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt also said that there are more than 15 trade offers already on the table, insisting that they've heard from over 75 countries seeking to avoid higher tariffs.
To the heart of your question, the president has spoke about the trillions of dollars that he expects in revenue from tariffs and how we can use it to pay down our debt and to ensure that we are no longer faced with a crippling national debt in the trillions that is going to bankrupt our nation for future generations. So that money coming back home will make America in the green rather than in the red.
But the Trump administration's efforts to reassure Americans in the world don't seem to be quelling worries. According to UN Trade Agency, if the U.S. applies its proposed tariffs in the coming months, global trade could shrink by 3%, global GDP could reduce by 0.7% by 2040, and the least developed countries are most exposed to its instabilities. All right, to discuss this further, we're now being joined by Robert Koeb from Los Angeles. He is a director of Asia Pacific Geoeconomic and Business Initiative, Chapman University, joining us live. Thank you so much for joining us on World DNA.
Thank you.
Now, let's get right into it. Of course, fears of an economic slowdown have risen sharply. Markets have had a roller coaster ride, to say the least. China and the United States are on a collision course. What is your assessment of this statement that has come out by BlackRock CEO Larry Fink, who's told that he thinks that the United States is very close, if not already, in a recession?
Well, as an economist, I have to first point out it's not possible for us to already be in a recession. That's at least 2 quarters of declining growth, and we're not there yet. But I think to Mr. Fink's point, what he's trying to intimate is that we are on the way to a recession and that there are so many negative indicators that it's to the point of inevitability. I don't think that's universally shared. It's interesting, Goldman Sachs, for example, just raised their probability of a recession to 45%. That's up from 35%. So it's not universally accepted that for sure there will be a recession, but I would have to agree with his general assessment that things are not looking good. The Trump administration just keeps piling on the negative factors.
Thank you so much for clarifying that, because that is exactly what I was going to come to next as to what the basis for this statement was. But thank you so much for clarifying that. That being said, now Trump says that he's optimistic that they could have a deal with China. There doesn't seem to be much basis for it, considering that China has refused to back down completely. It's put retaliatory tariffs on American goods of up to 125%. How do you see things going forward?
Well, interesting you mentioned the 125% because I've been asked a number of times over the recent days, who's going to blink first? And you could say China just blinked, or at least gave a half a blink, because they said, along with raising the tariff to 125%, that they wouldn't raise it anymore. So that seems to be the olive branch. And that's the opening, if the Trump administration knows how to play it, to restart discussions. And that seems to be at the crux of the matter. They've never really talked to China in a serious way. There's been some reports that there were some back channel attempts, but nothing like a serious effort at dialogue. And apparently, Trump is also insisting that she calls him, which is also very wishful thinking, to say the least. I think the Trump administration, starting with President Trump himself, is a bit delusional in thinking that China is just begging for a deal. Yes, they're hurting, and you could make a very good case that they're going to hurt more than the US, but they are not coming in a supplicant manner the way the Trump administration seems to expect. So they're going to have to negotiate carefully and really navigate, I should say, first, and use that opportunity of them saying they're not going to raise tariffs anymore. The US now has 20% higher tariff than China does, and use that as an opening.
You raise a very pertinent point there that would explain why there is some optimism as to China somewhat softening its stance with this 125% retaliatory tariffs. That being said, we also did hear that a statement coming out of China saying that the European Union and China should align with each other to defy this unilateral bullying, is what they've called it. That being said, this 90-day pause, how do you assess that? Do you think something good could come out of this?
Yeah, I would say that's the other, out of a lot of really unintelligent moves, is the most charitable way to describe them from an economic standpoint, that the Trump administration has been making recently. That is one of the better ones. That's relatively speaking, but having gone after all sorts of countries, including, of course, India, it has now said, okay, we're going to lower the tension, bring the tariffs down to only 10%. That's still significant, but it's a big reduction over what they were for most of these important trading partners. And having that 90-day pause gives some breathing room and hopefully some productive negotiations. I would note that probably the best sign of that is that Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, has said he's going to be having negotiations with Tokyo. And when you look at Asia, that's the #2 economy after China, and it's arguably America's most important strategic partner in the Asia Pacific. India would obviously be perhaps right up there if we include the broader area of the Indo-Pacific. But as a treaty ally and important, really a vital trading partner in the region, having these discussions at first with Japan is an encouraging sign.
Right now, just for better understanding for our viewers here as well, market sentiment does remain a negative. Do you see fears easing sometime in the near future?
Well, it's there's fear and there's uncertainty, and there's actually some difference between the two. So we tend to think of fear as being measured by volatility. Uncertainty means everything kind of gets frozen in place, or there's no sense of momentum or logical direction. So what you have more than anything right now is uncertainty, and that's compounded by the fear. So not to sound too technical, but there are two factors at work here. So the overwhelming sense is actually the uncertainty. There are a lot of people who believe, at least in the United States, in what the Trump administration is trying to do. He has, in fact, Larry Fink, for example, the beginning of our conversation being around his comments, he's notable for saying, although he's more aligned with the Democratic Party and Democratic causes, he actually said before the November 2024 election that he felt there wouldn't be much difference if Kamala Harris or Donald Trump won. He's obviously not thinking that now. But, also in his comments about the sense of a recession already being underway was this notion of uncertainty being the really big issue here. And I would totally concur with that. So the problem with uncertainty is there's no sense of how to go forward. There's no business planning. The consumers don't know what to do. It's that really freezes things in place. There are going to be some people who will support Trump's moves and will be encouraged by those. So that isn't such a big issue with fear in that regard. But the uncertainty is everywhere because no one really knows what the Trump administration plans to do going forward and how long, if they do make a move, that will stay in place because there's so much back and forth.
Right. In fact, we were joined by Mr. Andrew Ferris yesterday. We were speaking to him, and there's one thing that he said, that the only thing Trump is really consistent with is being inconsistent. So I believe uncertainty and in being inconsistent, that really is the consistent theme here. Of course, there'll be lots more to discuss with Trump back in the White House. Thank you so much for joining us on World DNA this morning with your insights and perspective on this.
Thank you.